For him, Caodaism is a religion that draws its strength from social concord and peace. The benevolent hospitality that the Vietnamese Caodaists found in Cambodia touched him deeply. He wished with all his heart that his countrymen might witness their deep gratitude in regard to the local authorities by continuing to work, here as elsewhere, in the respect of the laws and customs of the country. He manifested, however, his astonishment on seeing that orders, no doubt misinterpreted, had been given upon the occasion of this festival, to keep the subjects of His Majesty Monavong from the merrymaking in the circumference of the Caodai's temple. His Eminency Thung Chu Tan, chief of the foreign mission, in residence at Phnom Penh, next took the floor. First he announced the death of Mrs. Lam Ngoc Tan, a great dignitary of Reformed Buddhism, who had just died at Vung Lien, and asked the audience to observe a minute of silence. Then he praised the founders of Caodaism in Cochin, China, particularly dwelling on the merits of the late Pope Lê Văn Trung, and another dignitary, the late lamented Cao Đài. Afterwards, having concluded the account of the new religion in Cambodia, the orator informed the audience that the ceremony of inauguration of the Temple of Phnom Penh coincided with the anniversary of the death of Victor Hugo, the spiritual chief of the foreign mission of Caodaism. 3 other speeches delivered in Cantonese, Chu Chao and Cambodian, reproduced almost word for word the speech of Mr. Tung Chu Tan. In the afternoon at 4:30 took place in the circumference of the monastery the procession of deified personages. Preceded by a unicorn and followed by a dragon, the procession gathered in their order the car of Buddha LİCH, an idol with a broad smile, impassible in his Nirvanian happiness, the altar of the Pope Lê Văn Trung, the portrait of Victor Hugo, the statue of Joan of Arc, the portrait of Cao Đài, that of Sun Yat-sen, founder of the Chinese Republic, and at last the big car of the sacred mountain on which sat enthroned the great sage LİCH, having on his right the goddess Quan Am, and on his left the warrior Quan Cung. At the foot of that mountain the late Pope Lê Văn Trung was blessing the crowd. The procession proceeded, accompanied and followed by noisy orchestras, made 3 times the tour of the temple, passing before the platform where were seated the whole fact, the personages of his retinue, and the dignitaries of the religion. On a part of the platform we noticed numerous Chinese women, newly converted and draped in white cloaks like the Vietnamese, with the marks and badges of their grade. In France, Le Fraterniste, in Cambodia, La Vérité, published this impression of the whole. The newspapers' illustrations, the pictures that I have before me, show the unusual splendor of the festival that took place under the presidence of the Superior. Thousands of followers had come from all parts, 15, 20, 25,000. It is difficult to estimate such Asiatic crowds. Speeches were made and broadcast by Charles, chief of the foreign mission, by Francois, a guiding spirit of the movement. Those speeches reflect a number of ideas that seem to me interesting. The sponsorship of the spirit Victor Hugo should be sufficient to underline the eminently spiritualistic character of Caodaism, the actual superior of which was the chief of the school of mediums at TIionP, Cochin, China. The real alliance of the religions of the Orient and the religions of the Occident is affirmed there in every part, at every moment, for the Caodai's pagodas are open to the veneration of Christ, Buddha, Lao-Tzu, Confucius, Mohammed, and all the messengers of God on the earth, be they spiritualists, Victor Hugo, Camille Flammarion, or benefactors of humanity. In an hour, when some are putting a label on everything for dividing mankind and sowing hatred, it seems useful to encourage this movement of reconciliation, union, universality. In an hour when some go back to the exclusive formulas and anathemas of the years of old, only here may you be saved. It seems good to repeat, even to the deaf. That is, forever finished with the pitiful game of labels. What only matters is not creeds, but acts. Allan Kardec has luminously expressed, outside of charity, no salvation. The pacific and pacifistic spirit of Caodaism is also worthy approval. The disciples of Cao Đài, the Supreme Being, are hostile to distinction of peoples, races, religions, colors, and wish a reconciliation of governments and the end of wars, which are always declared by governments. Facing the Occident, the Caodaists cry, "We are for peace, fraternity of men, friendship of peoples, collaboration of races." Here we are far from the barbarous politics of totalitarian states, black, brown, or red pestilences, and hired adventurers who, in each country, seek to ape copying the new Baden-Guet. One sees in it an admirable spiritualistic synthesis, where even an unbeliever finds his spiritual bread, because he may, in a Caodaist pagoda, ask the rules of conduct of Confucius or the sage LịCH. Indeed, the temple of Cao Đài does not refuse its spiritual treasuries to anybody. May we be far from our label stickers, our little chapels, our small clans of benighted prefectures and sub-prefectures, dead dust. The timetable enables us to understand the importance of these 3 days of festivals. Program of May 21st, 1937. Morning. 5:15 a.m. Gathering of dignitaries and members at the temple. 5:30 a.m. Reception of H.H. Holfap in the temple. 6 a.m. Great ritual ceremony and sanctification of the symbolic globe. 9 a.m. Reception of H.H. Holfap on the esplanade of dignitaries and presentation of the sacerdotal body. 9:30 a.m. Songs and prayers by the children's chorus. Opening speech in Vietnamese by H.E. Thung Chu Tan, Gao Su, Chief of the Foreign Commission. Speeches in Chinese and Cambodian. 11 a.m. Prayer at microphone for world concord and peace. Noon. Ritual ceremony and prayers for the dead. Evening. 4 p.m. Gathering of dignitaries on the esplanade. 4:30 p.m. Procession of the portrait of Victor Hugo around the temple to be later installed on the esplanade of Bac 5:30. Ritual ceremony and prayers by the children's chorus. Lectures in Cambodian by Chan Chu Su, Van Van Chu. Lectures in Vietnamese by Gao Su Hung Hung, Madame Tran Kim Hung. Thiep Dao Cao Đức Trung and Khai Phap, Chai Du Nha. Speech in French by the Chief of the Foreign Mission. 11 p.m. Great ceremony of the anniversary of Victor Hugo, Spiritual Chief of the Foreign Mission of Caodaism. Program of May 22nd. Morning. 5 a.m. Ritual ceremony. 8 a.m. Prayers for the repose of the dead and for world concord and peace. 11 a.m. Ritual ceremony. Evening. 4 p.m. Gathering of dignitaries on the esplanade. 4:15 p.m. Reception of H.H. Holfap on the esplanade. 5 p.m. Reception of French and local authorities, representatives of the press, and guests. 5:15 p.m. Prayer by children of the chorus in honor of the religion. Speech of inauguration of Cao Đài Temple by the Assistant Chief of the Foreign Mission at microphone. 6 p.m. Visit of the temple by the authorities and all the spectators. 6:15 p.m. Signing of the Golden Book. 6:30 p.m. Tea of Honor. 8 p.m. Speech of H.H. Ofap, H.H. Pham Kun Tak at microphone. Religious lectures by H.E. Kung Chu Tan, other religious lectures. 11 p.m. Ritual ceremony. Program of May 23rd. Morning. 5 a.m. Ritual ceremony. 6 a.m. Gathering floats, votive tablets, dragons, unicorns, music, etc. on Pierre Pasquier Boulevard, opposite the Caodaism temple. 6:45 a.m. Start of the procession and train for town. 11 a.m. Ritual ceremony. Evening. 4 p.m. Gathering of dignitaries on the esplanade. 4:30 p.m. Allotting of prizes for floats, dragons, unicorns, votive tablets, music. 5 p.m. Chants by the children's chorus in honor of the religion, with music, ritual ceremony. 6 p.m. Religious lectures by various dignitaries. Closing speech by LİCH. 10 p.m. Prayers in chorus for the repose of the dead and for world concord and peace. 11 p.m. Great ceremony of the 15th day of the 4th month of the year Din Su. Mr. C.H. Belin, ex-resident of France in Cambodia, sent from Paris his general impression. I read with great interest the documents you sent me concerning the inauguration of the Caodaism temple of Phnom Penh. I have shared them with some friends and personalities interested in this movement, which tends toward the unification of religions and to universal fraternity. In the course of history, the opposition of various religions has caused a great deal of bloodshed, and one could wish that a mutual comprehension might be imposed for the happiness of humanity. The progress of science has reduced distances more and more, but if the peoples of the earth understand each other a little better than formerly, it is no less true that they are often deceived by bad shepherds, and that there exist, alas, many misunderstandings among them. If Caodaism spreads, we may expect an era of peace and quiet, if not of happiness, the latter being not of this world. Each one, therefore, must hold his own road in that direction. For my part, I am truly very glad to know that the odious persecutions of which the Caodaists have been the victims is over. One could not then, with the help of all, hinder the diffusion of a doctrine that might, as Buddha preached, it is not hate, but love that unites hearts, make calm to reign over the surface of this still troubled earth. My kind fraternal greetings, signed Charles Belin. Doctrinal Precisions. One of our good Caodaist brethren, Mr. Gabriel Gobron of LİCH, a little better informed than our great journalists of Paris, city of light, presented in VU, September 7, 1932, a documentary and illustrated article on Caodaism, contrasted with those who batten on error and lie. Mr. Gobron can prove how much he has suffered in committing himself to tell the truth about Caodaism. At the beginning of the year 1926, in a compartment situated in the vicinity of the Hall Central in Saigon, gathered some young learned men, all Buddhists who were cultivating spiritualism in their leisure hours. The idea had come to them from the seances and revelations of one of their masters, a convinced spiritist and representative of the most important spiritist society in France. The beginnings were not conclusive, but little by little, with the extreme patience which characterizes the Oriental, by eliminating those who did not possess fluid, replacing them by comrades better endowed, they registered, it seems, extraordinary results. They were, at the beginning, put in communication, they claim, with the spirit of one of the sages of Chinese antiquity, LİCH, more commonly called LİCH, the Chinese homeland. He who reformed literature under the 13th dynasty Tang, 713 to 742, an earnest Taoist who dictated them some messages. There were also those from Quan Tang de Quan, the Chinese Turan. So what seemed first to these neophytes of spiritism an amusement rapidly became a mystic occupation, the conversation with superior spirits from beyond, from whom they took counsel. But the use of the turning table to correspond with the occult world seeming to them impractical, that this they confided to the spirit, who recommended the billed basket, kind of rattan helmet, and at the same time counseled them to learn from the wisdom of one of their countrymen, the Fu Chu, a man versed in spiritism. The latter, who was following the doctrine of Gautama Buddha and practicing the morals of Confucius, told them that he had been in relations with the spirits for several years, from whom he had obtained this revelation: the existence of a supreme being, sovereign of the universe. He was Cao Đài. He taught the young men to use the billed basket and participated in their spiritist seances. At the suggestion of the spirits, they entered into contact with one of their countrymen, a former Cochin Chinese mandarin and member of the government council, LệCH, whose life of dissipation and unrestrained pleasure did not predispose him to the part he was to be called to play. LệCh's conversion was miraculous. Moved by grace, the opium smoker smoked no more. The tippler abstained from his favorite alcohol. He ceased to eat meat and fish, gave up the pleasures of the flesh, became a vegetarian, and practiced the asceticism of the austerest bonds. It was in a following and memorable meeting of spirits that the billed basket enjoined LệCh to take up the propagation of Caodaism, and conferred on him the title of Pope of the new religion. On the subject of the universality of Caodaism, our brother very well explains the meaning of Cao Đài. Cao Đài is the symbolic name of the Supreme Being, who, for the third time, would reveal himself to the Orient. The opinion of the followers of the new faith is that God, adapting his teachings to the progress of the human spirit, now more advanced than formerly, should this time be manifested through mediums, he being unwilling to allow any mortal the privilege of founding Caodaism. This new manifestation of the Supreme Being so comes because all religion submitted to human founders' authority is unsuited to universality, seeing that this prophets protested against the truths proclaimed by other religious faiths, towards which they show a marked intolerance. The Caodaist doctrine is, in great part, drawn from the three principal and oldest religions of the Orient: Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism. It maintains their purest principles, recognized as being the eternal, immutable truths of the divine law, but it intends to re-establish in their true meaning certain beliefs that seem to have been twisted. So refounded, this doctrine conciliates all religious convictions and adapts itself to various degrees of spiritual evolution. From a moral point of view, it reminds man of his duties and obligations, teaches him to know how to behave toward himself, his family, society, and the whole of humanity. From a philosophical point of view, it preaches contempt for honor, wealth, luxury, in a word, the freeing from servitudes of matter, to look to spirituality for the full quietude of the soul. From the point of view of worship, it recommends the worship of God and the veneration of the superior spirits, who constitute the occult august hierarchy. It admits the cult of ancestors, built upon the principles of Buddha, but stands out nevertheless against meat offerings and the use of votive papers. From a spiritualist point of view, it agrees with other religions on the existence of the soul, its survival from the physical envelope, its evolution by successive reincarnation, the posthumous consequences of human actions ruled by the law of karma. From the point of view of initiation, it preaches to those of the followers judged worthy the revealed teachings to empower them, by a process of spiritual evolution, to approach ecstasies of bliss. The basis of Caodaist doctrine is the practice of good and virtue. How could it be otherwise with a religion that amalgamates the three great systems of the Orient, Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism, in order to uphold only the highest teachings and eliminate the lower precepts considered as factors of superstition and ignorance? 1. The merciful Buddha preached devotion and charity. 2. The Taoist doctrine prescribed the worship of truth and the discipline of character. 3. The sage Confucius traced the way of the golden mean. Cao Đài united the great principles of love and goodness taught by the three saints, preaching a new religion wherein men of all colors must strive by new disciplines toward the creation of a better world, of a world from which would be excluded wars and conquests, and in which the races might fraternize. Our brother answers the objection of a certain journalist that Jesus Christ would be there only a second-rate divinity. Christ is a hyphen between Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. If he is placed below Far Eastern divinities, it is because he came to the world many centuries later. In 1932, Mr. G. Abadi had already foreseen the long and painful chapter of jokes and persecutions that were to be let loose, and from which he would not himself escape. The new religion, Reformed Buddhism, did not raise, on the account of the proverbial tolerance of the Far Eastern peoples, any quarrel between the old worship and the Reformed one, considering that it was not so intransigent as to declare that, besides its morals and doctrine, it could only have error and punishment. It shows, on the contrary, its respect for religions, the teachings of which seemed to it worth veneration, and it did not hesitate at all, beside Buddha, LİCH, and Confucius, to put in honor the image of Christ, wishing to spread a teaching, the origin of which troubled it less than its intrinsic value. There is nothing more to it, except that the ground of its dogma is the law of the three saints, Buddha, LİCH, Confucius, of which it conserves the old beliefs, habits, and rituals. One might ask himself, especially these last years, what can be the deep causes that have put the native soul heretofore asleep, toward a religiosity reaching the mystic fanaticism of the high periods of faith? Why this religious awakening, one asks? The Caodaist doctrine tends to a moral and social action by making the Vietnamese people recover under the lead of their elite the traditional taste of their simple, frugal, and careful existence. One wonders to see France, or more exactly some overzealous and certainly ill-inspired officials, take side against the heretics of the reformed heathen religion, in favor of, it seems, the old belief, which, moreover, does not solicit it, and require that the orthodox doctrine of the old Buddhism be respected without change, nor evolution of any sort that adapts it to new conceptions. The explanation of the campaign conducted against Caodaism is found in the obstruction that gives rise to the Reformed religion, the number of faithful, which is in Cochin China, for instance, more than 1 million out of 3.5 million inhabitants. The former governor of Cochin China, Blanchard de la Brosse, is now exposed to public opprobrium for having declared practicable and authorized this religion in the territory under his jurisdiction. But the alarm is given and a crusade is launched against the heretics. Since then, great progress toward understanding has been accomplished, and Caodaism is on the way to becoming the official religion of the new state of Vietnam. LİCH published a series of articles, The True Visage of Caodaism, from which we shall cite only the most curious passages. It was, as the title indicates, an objective report. We can't pay a better compliment to it, for the truth is also God's service. Let my dear readers be assured, instead of pulling a long face in reading the subject of this inquiry, looking me up and down with an astonished or skeptical or mocking eye, murmuring imprecations against me, let them listen calmly to the confessions of a man who, like them, and nearly all Tokinese intellectuals, has willingly ridiculized a religion newly born in his own country, simply because he has understood nothing of it. Newly born is not quite the word. Following the Caodaist calendar, humanity is in the year of the third amnesty of God in the Orient. It is then 10 years ago that this religion came into its own. An experienced sociologist must notice that since the first quarter of this century, Vietnam has undergone an abrupt shock. There has been a complete overthrow of the destiny of people, its thought and faith. The return of the two fans announced the first symptom of that fever which increases daily. From a political point of view, that is revolution in all minds and hearts. From an economic point of view, it is the intensive development of industry, the formation of cooperatives and syndicates. From a literary point of view, the radical reform of the language, the introduction of new concepts in poetry and art, and as for the domain of religion, the birth of a new faith. To the rebuke that Caodaism would be constituted only by ignorant and superstitious masses, skillfully shorn by swindlers and charlatans, this reply: the thousands of Caodaist believers are not all credulous or superstitious persons. A great number of those who practice the new religion in Cochin China, in Tonkin, in China, and in France are intellectuals of the upper class, teachers, lawyers, writers, journalists, deputies. It is not without reason that Caodaism caused many to make mention of it throughout the world, that several famous reviews of Paris, London, Lisbon, Warsaw, even of Rome and of Buenos Aires, have started to study its dogma and doctrine. The author of this inquiry has had the rare privilege of ransacking the archives of the Holy See of Tainan, where he could read letters and precious documents, bulletins of conversion addressed to the Pope by foreign personalities from different capitals of Europe and America. Even Japan, a country proud of its Bushido, has sent scholars to Tainan trying to understand what is this new faith which has shaken the world's opinion. LİCH also made a report that was put out in pamphlet form, special edition of this daily of Phnom Penh, and from which we note the following extracts. During the 12 years in which Caodaism has developed in Indochina, it is to be noticed that no serious objective study has yet been consecrated to it. However, this social and religious movement touches hundreds of thousands of human beings on an ever-widening scale. The new religion, feeling itself cramped within the limits of its cradle, Cochin China, has sent its missionaries to Cambodia, to Annam, and to Tonkin, where it flatters itself with some success. It has its temple in Paris, and ambitions soon to bring the good word as far as China, Siam, India, and Europe. The Vietnamese pride is thus expressed unexpectedly in a field of action that was unknown to Gao Chi's descendants. They brought nothing to human thought. Why? Mystery. The Caodaism seems to despise the enigma so put, for it pretends to the dignity of religion at the same level as Buddhism. Moreover, it is not called Reformed Buddhism. This ambition alone of the new faith that counts, it is said, millions of followers, among which many intellectuals, induces us to study Caodaism carefully. Obeying today to the injunctions of friends, we've decided to present to the waiting public some truths about the new doctrine, some observations and objective analyses. LİCH. In the preface of the pamphlet, the author adds these considerations. Some have loosed on the spiritist origins of the Caodaism much easy irony. They have tried to clothe off by ridicule divine messages transmitted by the turning tables in the billed basket. What is there then surprising, unexpected in the eternal truth, borrowing that vehicle instead of making itself heard on Sinai surrounded with lightnings and thunder, or expressing itself by the voice of inspired prophets or marvelous apparitions? Do not the efforts of a medium elected to that mission, as noble as any, isn't it at all so legitimate, offer as many guarantees as as any voice chosen until the present to help heaven to communicate with earth. As for the persecutions of which Caodaism has been the object, and of which the error is perhaps not closed, may we not see therein the better proof of its celestial origin and its supernatural character? All religions preaching like it justice and goodness, founded like it on sacrifice and love, have known the hostility of man, the rancor of the powerful, the anger and reprobation of all those whose satisfied egos they came to trouble, whose authority they shook, whose pride and tyranny they combated. To be persecutor or persecuted, to dominate by force or to be a victim of violence, to impose faith by arms or to accept martyrdom, there is not in all history other alternatives for growing religions. Had Caodaism any choice? Its only weapon is gentleness. It could oppose to its enemies, but its resignation and confidence in the final triumph of justice. It could, unsubmitting itself to the laws, but proclaim, without weakening, its invincible attachment to the truth come from above. It could only endeavor to prove, by its firmness and constance, the authenticity of its divine mission. This is what it has done. And its persecutors have been forced to bow before such heroic and quiet courage, to recognize its right to life, to grant it freedom, the only favor it claims. Victorious over force, now disarmed, it remains to Caodaism to conquer the misunderstanding of men, their blindness, their skepticism. These are redoubtable enemies. The other religions of which it is the synthesis have already confronted them. They have succeeded. Why shouldn't it, too, succeed? Of what we can reproach it? Too much good faith? Too much sincerity? Too much tolerance? Is it for proposing an ideal too broadly, too fraternally human that we might reproach it? Is it at all contradictory in that fusion of diverse religions, each keeping of its primitive faith the essence and what forms for all a kind of common fund, that it must find means to make fraternity and the universal peace reign over mankind? Here is how the Supreme Master, in one of his messages, explains the necessity of that fusion. Formerly, the peoples did not know one another and lacked means of transport. I then founded, at different epochs, 5 branches of the Great Way: Confucianism, the worship of geniuses; Christianism, Taoism, Buddhism, each based on the customs of the race called particularly to apply them. Nowadays, all parts of the world are exploited. People knowing each other better aspire to a real peace. But because of the very multiplicity of those religions, men do not always live in harmony with one another. That is why I decided to unite all those religions in one, to bring them to a primordial unity. Moreover, the holy doctrine of those religions has been, through centuries, more and more denatured by those who have been charged to spread, up to such a point that I have now firmly resolved upon myself to show you the way. It is then the whole world that now is offered to a postulate of Caodaism, heir of the antique doctrines that have already conquered the quasi-unanimity of men. The task shall be hard, for, as says the message we have just read, men have forgotten the very principles of the doctrines which they pretend to profess. They have sometimes conserved the letter, but have more often lost the spirit. The task shall be hard, for though the land where the missionaries must go to prepare the mission is no longer tillable, it is full of parasitic and poisonous plants, as vigorous and solidly rooted as if all the human evil passions served them for manure. Never was the need more felt of reminding men that they are all sons of one Father, and that the horrible fratricidal struggles to which they gave themselves up yesterday, to which they are ready to submit tomorrow, shall cause the ruin and the sorrow not only of themselves, but of their children, and of their children's children. Caodaism is a synonym of peace, fraternity, love. May the millions of the believers it shall someday count, and may that be soon, remember to inspire their conduct by the eternal maxim that is found in the books of the masters of all times, in which are summed up all science and all wisdom. Love one another. What is the point of view of the Caodaism sacerdocy on this report? It is LİCH gives it to us. Our objective inquiry communicated to the Orthodox Church of Caodaism has earned from its greatest chief, the superior FANPAGE, the charming letter from which we cite below an excerpt concerning the relation of the Dید to Minhoism. Our readers shall understand by this simple letter the broad tolerance of the Caodaist spirit, which rejects no belief on account of its nonconformity or its non-orthodoxy. Such an attitude honors the Caodaists, notwithstanding all other social and philosophical considerations. Editor's note. FANPAGE, Superior of Caodaism or Reformed Buddhism, Holy See at TIionP, to the Director of LİCH (non-pen). Mr. Director, the Caodaist sacerdocy and I are deeply touched by your high token of sympathy toward our religion. We have read your report with interest. Further, it is the only organ that has courageously defended our cause since the beginning. We can say that it is our friend. This report is interesting from any point of view, save some little errors of documentation, of which we beg you to be so kind as to grant us hearing. Caodaism does not spring from the Minhoist movement. We recognize that the Min Li was organized before us, but it is separated from us by a mystic and philosophical point of view. The truth is that the Vietnamese spiritualist movement came into being spontaneously with the help of no foreign concept, doctrine, or dogma. It was unforeseeable. We can say that it was almost miraculous. As if led by an invisible power, the manifestation is latent. Moreover, this movement has been felt in all the world. All the spiritualist organizations that were created after the war were perhaps born of that unknown power. As for the Caodaists, a group of intellectuals gathered to search for the possibility of harmonizing the two civilizations, the Oriental and the Occidental. They have tried in this case to bring close the two philosophies, Christianity and Confucianism. The attempt is so encouraging by reason of the high morality of the great thinkers who thus converge toward the good and the beautiful. There exists, then, a spot where ideas can meet, and thus thoughts be united. Knowing this, the group of Vietnamese intellectuals took steps to prepare a field of mutual understanding. They had begun very modestly, first by making a comparison between two philosophies while looking for an intermediary. They have had the satisfaction to see great ideas can no longer separate thinkers of the human race. Morals are one. It is only practice that differs. Here is to them an obstacle or a catch. The power to act is not within, the reach of common men such as they. It is above their reach. A bit of slowing down was seen in the Caodaist movement. These intellectuals seek for a way, unity of faith and practice of all religions. Without my describing it, you can guess the value of such an attempt. One of their friends came from France in the person of Captain Monet. He is a spiritist. He took interest in the researches of these intellectuals, but friendly understanding in the practice of all religious faiths escaped from him too. He advised them to consult the spirits. That is to say, they have had recourse to the help of the beyond to solve their difficulties. The first spiritist communication, given by the spirits in the form of a council, gives them the key to the enigma. The conclusion is this: faith derives from the conscience. The conscience is impossible of subordination. It differs according to the state of the spirit of each individual. It is impersonal and inalienable, because it is God's emanation, the universal conscience. So, a liberty of conscience for all human beings is proclaimed, but union in the spirit of the beautiful in the good is obligatory, from which was born the Caodaist doctrine, the doctrine of broad tolerance. One might say that Caodaism is a purely philosophical religion, whereas the LİCH is a body that limits itself to a cultural practice of the three Oriental religions, Buddhism, Taoism, and Confucianism, mixed a little with hypnotical mysticism. It is a friend to Caodaism in its social manifestation, but it is not a blood brother. We hope to be able to meet it in the practice of the beautiful and the good, of which we make an apostolate of propaganda. Signed, FANPAGE. And here is one of the famous spiritualistic seances at the beginning of Caodaism. It was in 1926. I was living in an apartment of the Deit building, now become the NHIN building. At my home, there came in and out young boys and girls, students, Republicans, Progressionists, and revolutionary militants. One Sunday morning, an unknown young man came into my office, took a seat beside me, and blurted out, without ceremony, these words which, however, did not astonish me. I have been, in fact, accustomed to this kind of visit and proposition. My dear friend, if you like, we are going to strike up a friendship, to study philosophy and politics together. You know, no doubt, better than I, what relation these two activities have to each other. In the feverish social and political atmosphere in which we lived at the time, which seems already strangely distant, I did not wonder either to read on my caller's card, Vietnamese revolutionists. On the evening of the day before appearing for the examination, the first part of his BA, this good boy was expelled from school. His crime? To have written to Mr. Cognac, at the time governor of Cochin, China, to protest against a certain speech of his. Since that moment, this student had set himself to read enormously, to steep himself in various philosophical systems, to be convinced of the necessity of a revolution, to manifest his new faith. He did not hesitate to have his calling cards printed, as I have showed above. The fanatics of my friend type were so numerous that I didn't suspect him to be a provocateur. Later, I found that my new friend was highly educated, that he was versed in spiritualistic philosophies, and that Spiritism interested him particularly. That is how I was led to know the movement of turning tables and medium communications. One evening in November, my friend was reminding me for the 9th time of the marvels of turning tables, which he had learned from the works of some promoters of French Spiritism, now departed, Allan Kardec and Leon Denis. I threw out a categorical challenge as to the veracity of these phenomena, defying to attempt an experiment. He brought me at once to some authentic chiefs of an occult school at that time newly born, the later activities of which were to have a great influence on the formation and development of Caodaism. His school was called Min Li Dao, which may be literally translated, the way of enlightened reason. I hasten to acknowledge that I was placed in the presence of extremely kind and honest men. They were humble employees in administration and business, eager for self-improvement and rising in society thanks to their continued efforts. They were 10 who gathered in a kind of coterie to discuss spiritualistic philosophies, and then when the theories were well assimilated to a new canon, they created themselves, with a view to venerating their saints and sages. I was very surprised at their broad spiritualistic learning. They were all capable of citing for me entire passages of the greatest works of the Spiritists. Better than their French masters, they had the audacity to use Henri Derville, the renowned occultist, in their pursuit of truth. That is how one of the leaders, Mr. Zung, kindly inaugurated the author's relationship with his group by a hypnotic experience. I confess, however, that I found in it nothing truly conclusive. After having me shut my eyes, he made various movements in the air with their two broad hands all around my head without ever touching it. After a quarter of an hour of this hypnotic preparation, he ordered me with a clear and caressing voice to incline my head in a certain direction, or to make certain gestures with my arms, which I did without difficulty. The spectators, who were members of the group, and my friend X, were visibly satisfied with the experience. As I insisted on attending a seance of some importance, Mr. LịCH, the most esteemed of the group, prepared it. On a table used as an altar, he had 9 candles placed triangularly. He then explained to me that the figure 9, as well as the geometrical placement, implied the number 3. 3 angles in a triangle, actually, and have a symbolic importance that only the initiate can understand. Then began the ceremony of offerings. The members of the group prostrated themselves before the altar, the chief, Mr. LịCH, placing himself in the middle. They recited prayers to the author of creation and the gods. After the offering of their hearts, it was flowers, tea, and alcohol. I noticed in their prayers the recognized themes of various Asiatic religions.